Alright guys, welcome to part 2 of the cherry bookshelf. So in this one we're going to be starting up on some of the other smaller joinery parts. So in the last episode we got the whole outside case put together with the top and bottom shelves. In this one we're going to be working on the middle shelf, which is just a blind dadoed into the center of the bookcase. So this was again something that was a little bit challenging to figure out how to do it properly. I didn't want to do it with a router or anything like that because hand tools are kind of fun to play with right now. And so it took a little bit of time to fit up the gap and cut the rabbet on the shelf, but it wasn't actually that hard. And so the next step, once I had the middle shelf in, was to cut the mortise and tenons for the top section divider. So I'm going to be putting 2 drawers in this top section, and so I needed 2 just dividers to keep those drawers from bumping into each other. And so I cut up these 2 pieces of cherry, put a few small mortises and tenons onto these small pieces to help keep those drawers separated and keep a little bit of an air gap between them. Just for a little bit of visual relief so that the drawers aren't just a solid area and you're not bashing them against each other when you're pulling them out. So the process for these was very, very simple and straightforward. It was just cutting the 2 pieces and slowly working down the different edges to make sure that they fit into these mortises as snugly as possible. I didn't need a precision fit because in the final glue up I was able to manipulate them slightly, but I went for as tight as I possibly could, and in hindsight I went a little bit too aggressive on it and made them a little bit loose. But it wasn't anything serious, it's just definitely a little bit more time and patience on these smaller parts would be a lot better. So then on the middle shelf, I wanted to make a little detail by just cutting off about 1/8 of an inch off the front edge. And this just set it in a little bit from the outside edges of the case, and the detail really ended up paying off. So now I get to put together pretty much the whole case before doing the glue up. This is vitally important. Any woodworkers out there that don't do a dry fit before you glue up, you are absolutely crazy, and I admire your bravado. But I find it very important to take the time to put everything together, check the fit, go through all of the clamps, make sure everything's all square before I ever take out the glue bottle. And so it was all about figuring out the best way to put it together that would be nice and efficient and would make the glue up a lot less stressful. And so you can see there's a few little gaps here and there, but overall it's nothing too serious. I'm quite happy with how it turned out. And so one thing I did differently on this project that I have never done before is I went through and I finished all the inside pieces. So I started by cleaning up all the panels with a super sharp and small cut on my hand plane. And so this did 2 things. It made sure all the panels were still nice and flat, as well as primed it for finish. Now, I've tried to swear off sanding in my shop. I really don't like dealing with the dust and going through sandpaper like crazy. So I try to do everything with a hand plane finish, and so far it has turned out super well. Especially on these panels, you'll get to see just how nice an oil finish looks on a freshly hand planed surface. So we're not going to go through too much of the oiling and finishing process. I just use tried and true natural varnish oil. It's the same finish I use on pretty much all my projects, and so it goes on absolutely beautifully. And so one of the things about cherry is that you don't really get to see drastic color change when you add the oil. You can see it's a little bit of a change, but nothing too exciting, which is why I didn't put too much to focus on this part of the project. You'll get to see it a little bit later once we do the outside of the case, but yeah. So I made sure to tape off all the joinery where there's going to be glue, just so we make sure that there's no oil on the glued pieces, because that would make it so they wouldn't stick together. And then I got to start the glue up. So this is probably to date, well, not, actually the hickory bench was a little bit more stressful than this, but there was definitely a lot more stuff that had to come together square and straight. And I mean, I was using Type-On 2 for this glue up, so I think I had about 30 minutes of working time. So you can see I'm going through nice and quick, trying to get everything together. And I mean, when I did the practice run, I didn't do it this way, but I should have, because this ended up being the much easier way to do it. Gluing in the vertical supports to the top shelf, and then just easing it into the top of the cabinet ended up being the simplest way to do it. then I could very quickly get some glue on all of the tenons and the pin board, and this was all very quick, very focused, so you'll notice that the camera angles don't change very much because I was dead focused on getting this thing together in time for before the glue started to harden. So I really wanted to make sure that it ended up square because everything relies on the glue up. If the glue up goes badly and the top section isn't square, then the drawers are not going to work in this thing. So it took a lot of focus, a lot of attention, but eventually I got it to this stage where you can see everything is glued together, and I could start putting some clamps on it. So it didn't take very many clamps because there's not a whole lot of points, but this clamp that I have on the top here is at a slight angle. So as I slightly tighten it or loosen it, it skews the case, and you can see I'm just constantly checking, making sure that this top section is square. And once everything's all good, I can glue in the middle shelf. Now this piece was the absolute easiest part, no stress whatsoever, everything's all together. It was really just add in a bead of glue, slide in this piece. It doesn't have to be held in there with anything spectacular either. And again, going on to just another fun part of the project. Everything's nice and solidly together, and so I came up with this kind of jerry-rigged way of holding the shelf to my workbench, which I just have a Canadian Tire workbench with a piece of plywood bolted to the outside, and it really worked very surprisingly well. I was able to just kind of, jerry-rig this clamping system to make sure I held the bookcase nice and tight against the workbench, and I could go through with my block plane, clean up the rough spots, or clean up the protruding pins and tails and tenons and all that stuff, and then I could finish it off with the jack plane. Now you'll notice that I'm hitting a little bit of a hump with the jack plane right in the middle of the panel, and that's where I put in that center shelf. So obviously when I put the center shelf in, it stretched a little bit, and it just kind of forced the outer panels outwards. Now again, this isn't a super big deal because with the jack plane, I'm now flattening the panel again so it's all perfectly square again, and I checked this multiple times, making sure I wasn't introducing twist, anything like that. So you can see here with the winding sticks, I very closely checked constantly. This was kind of a back and forth, and so the first few passes were very rough, just kind of knocking down material, and then before I did any of the finish planing, I went through and got my blade back up to that razor sharp point. You know, that point where you can slide the blade up your arm and every little arm hair pops right off. And this is something that I absolutely love to do. I have a bald spot on my left wrist where you can see every time I sharpen my plane blade, I always have to make sure it's that just perfectly razor sharp. And you can see here, I'm really not taking off anything. I'm just cleaning up the lines that were left behind on my my deeper passes. And I found that this is just about the best way, because not only are you, basically by rubbing the hand plane over, you're burnishing the surface. And then another trick I found is rubbing the hand plane shavings over the surface of the wood, and this just creates that beautiful natural sheen, almost a semi-gloss sheen that is unbeatable by any modern finishes. And so again, we're pulling out the tried and true varnish oil to coat the outsides. And again, there's no spectacular color change like there is with other woods, but just knowing that this finish is completely natural and can be recoated any time is great. And so the top part was a little bit challenging because I had to work from both directions in order not to blow out the dovetails. And so again, I had to sharpen the plane blade right before doing this, and very, very carefully using a 40-degree blade in my low-angle jack, I was able to completely avoid any tear out, and I'm so genuinely surprised by that. And so for the back panel, I decided to just go with some ash sapwood. Now I have a bunch of this laying around that I bought a while ago, and I didn't really have any good uses for it. Ash sapwood is a very delicate wood, I found, and it doesn't work very well with a lot of tools. So I've got a lot of these pieces left over, and I really like the contrast between the ash and the cherry. And so I decided just to add a dab of glue into the top and bottom sections, and then reinforce this with a few 18 gauge 1-inch nails. Now I took my time again because I didn't want these to blow through any of the cherry panels, and again, so it's very close. But you'll have to wait until the next episode to see how it looks.